As mentioned in the first episode of Dark Disturbances, Alterworld's origins can be traced back to 2003 with the haunting of the house where me and my brother Chris lived at the time. Although unexplained phenomena occurred at random in the house on Clark Street for years, it wasn't until me, Chris, and our cousin Daryl began investigating this activity that it escalated in both frequency and aggressiveness. After 20 years, we're finally telling the entire story.
There really isn't a whole lot to discuss about the fifth investigation in and of itself.
Well, when we was doing the hunting, trying to see if we could find anything, it was pretty much for me uneventful because there wasn't a lot of things happening.
Wasn't a whole lot going on. I wasn't really there a whole lot. I think I was working a lot of hours at the time.
However, there was one event that occurred. Lenny ended up leaving for whatever reason, and me and Rob ended up by ourselves in the room where the entrance to the attic was.
We had been knocking and making noises, trying to get the thing to respond to us, and I heard him knock.
I remember knocking on the steps going up into the attic to see if I could get a similar response. And I don't know how much time passed. It was a good few minutes.
And then there were 3 knocks back
from up in the attic.
They were very distinct knocks.
I can recall my mouth dropping open and the spit in there drying up. So I knocked again.
That was Daryl.
And this time there was nothing.
And that was pretty much the only communication that we got back from anything in the attic.
Other than that first night, the activity was really at a minimum. A little later on, we realized that we were running out of tape, and no one wanted to run out and get more at that hour. We were just like, well, okay, we'll call it for tonight, get some tapes when we get up tomorrow, and, we'll try again. But looking back on that now, that first night, we should have known something was going to happen. It seemed like with whatever was in that house, when you were starting to feel like there was no activity and you were starting to feel safe, that was when something was actually sneaking up on you.
So the scariest part and the oddest part of this hunt,
That night it got kind of crazy.
of course we'd ran out of tape at this time. I think that the shape kind of knew that.
I don't remember exactly whose idea it was to do so and why.
We slept in the living room together.
We had a couple different chairs we were all sleeping in.
And I was on the couch.
I believe somebody was on the floor.
In true East Sider flop house fashion, I dragged Chris's mattress out put it on the floor, and that's where I was going to sleep. Every living creature within that house was in the living room. Me, Rob, Chris, and Lenny were all in there. We brought all the dogs in. We brought their food and water dishes. And Aunt Sandra was, she would have been behind me in her bedroom sleeping. That's where she was. I remember those 3 pricks going to sleep. And I was a terrible night owl back then, so, it took me longer to fall asleep. And I was sitting there on Chris's mattress. And there was these bifold doors. The bifold doors basically separated the living room from the dining room.
Pretty much we kept them open all the time, at least one of them, but for some reason this night we had both of them closed.
There was a little bit of light coming in from the dining room, and this light, its source was a street lamp or street light that was out on Greenwood. The windows in the dining room, they had blinds which were down, but it still put in enough light to where I could see the light underneath the door. And I saw this obstruction. And at first I didn't really think anything of it. I thought maybe, it was a chair or a tub or something that was out there that I hadn't taken into account. And then the obstruction moved. I remember picking up the flashlight and My first thought was, oh, these fucking pricks are fucking with me. One of them got out there somehow, and I shined the light, and there was Chris sleeping, and Lenny sleeping, and Robert sleeping. I could hear Sandra snoring away in her room, and my next thought was that somebody had gotten into the house. I can recall slowly going up to those bifold doors. They were closed, but I was trying to look through there was like a very small crack, between the doors. And I was trying to look out there to see if I could see anything. And occasionally I would catch this, like a flash of movement, something dark that was moving around out there in the dining room. There was just enough light for me to be able to visually decipher that. And I don't know how long, I was trying to look at it, but I could just tell by the way it was moving that it wasn't an intruder. It was almost like whatever was out there had too many frames of animation, if that makes any sense. So eventually my nerve kind of broke and I started to wake the others up.
At a certain point, my cousin Daryl took and had woke me up.
We all started kind of waking up.
He woke me up. He said he saw, looked like something was moving.
And we heard movement out in the dining room.
Daryl and my cousin Chris were at the folding doors, and they were looking through it.
So Chris, he was off to my left, and he was still kind of on the couch.
So I'm kind of looking in between the slats and stuff, Didn't want to open up the door in case there was something over there, how that goes.
I don't know how much time passed.
All of a sudden I see like this kind of like orange reddish, and I don't have real good colored palette with my eyes.
I know that I saw something moving. It was just a solid shadow kind of moving around out there.
And I stopped moving. And whatever it was continued to move. And that's when I realized that it wasn't just one thing, it was two. It was two eyes. Two red eyes staring at me or trying to peek back in when I'm trying to peek back in.
Then I remember Chris,
And I freak out and I jump backward.
screamed something along the lines of, "Holy shit, I just saw red eyes looking at me, dude!"
And Daryl jumps up.
Daryl decided to go ahead and fling the doors open.
Flings it open.
And shine a light out there.
With this flashlight, like scare it or whatever, but there's nothing.
And we didn't see anything moving anymore. We didn't hear any movement.
There wasn't jack shit out there. And so the four of us, we
moved forward into the dining room area.
Me and Chris, we opened up the door to his bedroom.
I think Lenny went off into the laundry room to check out what's going on over there. And Rob went ahead into the kitchen.
These were all rooms that were off the dining room.
Remember, we were looking around, not really finding anything. We're all, I'm freaked out because something was obviously in there watching us.
We couldn't find anything. There was nothing.
And the three of us, as we were walking
back out in the dining room, we're about ready to go into the kitchen.
And I went to go grab the basement door.
Because the basement door for the house was actually in the kitchen.
And as I touched the door handle,
we hear this really loud rattling.
Something shook the door on the other side and shook the door handle.
We jog in there.
Kind of pulled my hand back. I'm like, whoa,
And we saw our cousin Robert
standing there with his hand in front of the doorknob to the door going to the basement.
He was scared. You could see it in his face.
I don't know what happened. Something just shook this door.
The four of us, we just kind of had this impromptu, meeting there in the kitchen. And, because our first instinct was to go downstairs, But then the more we talked it over, we remembered that we didn't have any tape, of course. So we decided that we would think of something to do the next night. And so we ended up going back to bed. I think this time we slept with lights on out there. So the next night we picked up a pack of fresh tapes and we investigated upstairs once more. But again, it was rather uneventful. It was mostly quiet. A little too quiet.
We decided to try and replicate what had happened the night before.
As close as we could. Only this time, we set up the camera with a fresh tape in the dining room. And I believe it was sitting on top of a folding chair that was facing the kitchen.
We all stayed out in the living room.
We all decided to sleep out in the living room again, just like we had the night before.
Close the doors.
We all went to sleep except for Daryl.
They all went to sleep, and after the night before, I wasn't going to sleep. After a little while, I want to guess it was about 20 to 30 minutes, I started to get the feeling that, I was being watched. And sure enough, that I could see movement again. It was that, that little bit of light at the bottom of the door. It was like something was standing there peeking in at me. And as much as I wanted to turn on a light or my flashlight or wake the others up, I held my nerve. Because I was just hoping that fucking camera was getting something. And I stayed up until the sun came up this time. I can just, I just remember it was the longest few hours of my life at that point. I kept waiting for that thing to, the doors to just fly open and that thing to bum rush me, or it just come right through the doors and bum rush me. It never did though, but that's what I was expecting. I don't remember how much time passed after that. We watched the tape. And there's this noise that's recorded at 4:51 a.m. And I'll be damned if I can tell you what it is.
When I first heard it, I thought it was some sort of tire screeching.
When I first watched the video, my initial thought is that it was some asshole speeding down Greenwood, with his tires screeching.
If you played it back a few different times, it could be a scream.
Sounded like a female scream that was coming from the dining room area.
When I first heard it, my jaw hit the floor because I didn't know that was right there in the next room. And I was just kind of a loss for words because something like that being that close, it really frightened me.
To me, it sounds like a woman running toward the camera while shrieking.
It sounds like a scream in a way, and could that be from maybe a woman screaming? Not sure.
And some other noise underneath it, like some sort of low frequency or a low frequency hum or a growl. I can't tell what it is. Even to this day, I don't know what it is. And I never heard anything like that. I would remember hearing something like that. And that night, I was awake, I was alert. I was basically playing night watchman, making sure everybody was okay. That nobody was attacked in their fucking sleep or something by this damn thing. And I didn't hear nothing like that.
Because, you don't expect things like that to happen.
This was the time when I started to kind of contemplate not who we were after, but what. Like, what exactly was in that house? I mean, what the fuck were we dealing with? That screams like that, that makes a noise like that. So a month went by. This would have been Saturday, November 15th. This was about the time that our investigation started to become a little more regular. And I remember having a brief little ghost hunt with Robert that Saturday night. Neither Chris or Lenny were there for this one. After a while, We went back downstairs where I ended up going to sleep, and Rob went on without me.
I was in the dining room doing a solo investigation. Daryl was sleeping on the other side of the closed doors in our living room on the couch. At the time, I did not see anything being captured.
No matter how you look at it, there's no way to conclusively prove what these shadows may have been.
It may be able to be debunked as far as saying that it could be a shadow of my foot moving. Potato camera that we had at the time, it wasn't high definition. It's not like we were Ghost Adventures or anything.
But considering what would happen afterward, and the way these shadows almost mimic the fluid speed of the figure we saw moving around in there the month before,
I would take the evidence for what it is and come to your own conclusions on it.
during the night, I remember having nightmares about the shape. Whether or not it was my own mind making up these images, or the house was, or the shape itself was having some sort of influence on me, I really couldn't tell you. I remember they were so vivid that I woke up the next day thinking that they had actually happened. So later that day, Sunday the 16th, me, Rob, Chris, and Sandra all went to Chris's girlfriend's, now wife's, birthday party. And I don't remember where it was at exactly, but it was at some hall that was rented for the purpose of the party. About early evening, Aunt Sandra asked me if I wanted her to run me back to the house because her, Rob, and Chris wanted to stay at the hall a while longer. I was like, yeah, I'll do that. So Sandra took me back to her house, and we pulled up in the back alley. We haven't mentioned it before. We always went through the back door. We never went through the front. And Sandra pulls in. She goes, huh, that's weird. I know I left that on. And I was like, what, Sandra? She said, the kitchen light. And sure enough, the kitchen light was off. Sandra always left that kitchen light on. It was like a night light to her, I guess. And, the weird night I had sleeping, it never crossed my mind. I was just like, well, she forgot to turn the light on, whatever. So Sandra gave me her house key and she left. I let myself into the kitchen, and the first thing that I noticed that was off was that none of the dogs were barking. At the time, she had 3 dogs, and they were all yappers. My last coherent thought was, I wonder where the dogs are. And I took a couple of steps across the kitchen, and there was just a little bit of light coming in from a light outside next door. And it was almost like something dimmed that light, and the entire kitchen just felt unnaturally dark. The next thing that I knew, it felt like there were needles in my brain, for lack of a better expression. It was almost pleasurable. Like I felt like I was getting high. I can remember like I couldn't see anything else but the dark, and I should have been able to see a little bit of the dining room, but I couldn't. And I felt like I was being lifted, but I can't tell you for sure if I truly was, or if it was just a sensation I was getting from whatever was going on. I don't know how long that went on like that, and I could just remember being just frozen, and like this voice in my head, my survival instinct was just telling me to, snap out of it and turn on the fucking light, you asshole. You're gonna fucking die. So that's what I did. I can remember just kind of like, shaking my head violently and stumbling forward and turning on that light. And I heard something upstairs when I did that. And the feeling, whatever that was that had happened, it was still there, but it was going away very quickly. And I remember one of my first thoughts was, holy fucking shit. It was just like what Chris said. You know, the fucking thing reached into his chest back in September. Except it didn't reach into my chest. It was like it was almost like it reached into my head. It was trying to, I don't know, pull my brain out like a fucking Mortal Kombat fatality. I don't know what it was trying to do. All those investigations we had done up until that point, and I had been afraid, but I was bullshit fucking scared now. And I remember going through that first floor and turning on every single light in every single room because for whatever reason that thing just did not seem to like the light. Which is odd because, you know, there were times it was encountered during the day. After I went through and turned on all the lights, all the dogs were in the living room and they were all kind of laying all huddled together. And they were kind of like, you know, they were looking at me and I could just tell they were afraid. And they kept looking at me and from me to the hallway door. And I waited there in that living room with them until I don't remember if it was Aunt Sandra or Chris came home. And I was like, fucking take me home. Okay, I've had enough of this fucking house for tonight, okay? And what's really fucked up is that I was a week past turning 25 years old and I was scared of the dark again. I went home and I remember, you know, being in my bedroom and going to turn off the light and I couldn't fucking do it. And I was afraid to sleep in the dark again for a while after that, several months. I mean, it was like I went from 25 to 5. And
You know, this shape thing was... You could feel that it was evil, basically.
I had to find out that, you know, Daryl had an incident at the house while he was alone.
It seemingly attacked Chris.
And I had a very similar incident months prior to this.
Later, Daryl would be attacked.
And it's like, okay, this is real serious, you know what I mean?
This thing didn't play around. When we didn't have the camera around, it did a lot of different things.
It starts putting a doubt in your mind. It's like, should we continue with this?
And it seemed to be getting agitated by us trying to hunt it down.
I was wanting to keep pushing forward. I knew that I could not back down because I had to make sure I stood up against whatever that was there was trying to take us down one by one.
But after a while, it's just like, you know what? We live here. We're going to have to deal with it.
it was turning into like a war of nerves. And we felt that our mission, if you want to call it that, to get proof of this thing, it was like the only weapon we had against it.